Madam President.
Senator from Alaska.
Madam President, I would ask unanimous consent that a military fellow in my office, Major John Vargas, be granted floor privileges for the duration of the debate on the FY 2010 Defense Appropriations Bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, on January 22nd of this year, I came to the floor to inform our colleagues here in the Senate about a decision by the Department of Defense that service in the Alaska Territorial Guard during World War II would not be regarded as active duty service for purposes of military retirement. That decision reversed the position that had previously been taken by the Army that this service did count toward military retirement. Madam President, as a consequence, 26 elderly Alaskans, descendants of the Aboriginal peoples who originally inhabited Alaska, 26 Native people, predominantly Eskimo, were about to see a substantial reduction in the military pensions. This all happening in the dead of an Alaska winter where we were paying extraordinarily high fuel prices. And at that time, when I came to the floor, I wondered out loud, what kind of government, what kind of Cruella would cut the pensions of 26 elderly people who stood up to defend Alaska and our nation during World War II with absolutely no prior warning, no advance notice? That answer was our government on advice of the lawyers. In the Defense Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2001, Congress recognized in the Alaska Territorial Guard as active duty service. Section 8147 required the Secretary of Defense to issue discharge certificates to each member of the Alaska Territorial Guard under honorable conditions if the Secretary determined that the nature and duration of the service of the individual so warrants. The military first concluded that that included retirement benefits and then abruptly reversed that position with immediate effect. As a Lieutenant Colonel McNorton explained in a story carried by the Associated Press, Section 8147 applies to military benefits, including health benefits, but it doesn't make members of the Territorial Guard eligible for retirement pay. Now, I must emphasize at this point that no Alaska Territorial Guardsman claimed a military pension solely because of his service in the Territorial Guard. The Alaska Territorial Guard was created in 1942 and disbanded in 1947. Many members of the Tundra Army, as some called it, continued to serve in the Alaska National Guard and other units of the military. That service, combined with service in the Territorial Guard, forms the basis for the claim. Now, Madam President, I've come to learn that when you use the term Cruella on the Senate floor, people sit up and take notice. My remarks were telegraphed across the blogosphere and national media outlets, and the response that came from across the country to the plight of the 26 elderly Alaskans was truly heartwarming. Across the ideological spectrum, the response from American people was really outrage over this. The high level of national interest in the plight of these Alaska Territorial Guards members was not lost on the senior leaders of the Army. The Secretary of Army rose to the occasion. He reached into his Emergency and Extraordinary Expense Fund, this is the EEE fund, to continue the payments to those elders for the 60 days in hope that Congress would have an opportunity to address the issue by then. My colleague Senator Begich and I promptly introduced legislation to correct that situation. But the legislation wasn't considered before the 60 days of temporary payments ran out. So the Alaska legislature stepped up to fill the gap, and they enacted legislation to continue the payments from state funds until February of 2010 in order to again give Congress the time to fix the problem. With the support of our colleagues, and I especially appreciate the leadership and support from Senators Levin, my colleague and friend Senator Inouye, Senator Cochran, language to clarify that service in the Alaska Territorial Guard counts towards eligibility for retirement pay that was included in that 2010 Defense Authorization Bill.
Time's expired.
Madam President, it was my understanding that I was to have 15 minutes under this time agreement. Is that correct?
The chair is aware of no such agreement, and the time for the Republican side has expired.
Madam Chairman, I do have additional comments that I would like to make. I would ask for unanimous consent that I have 5 minutes to conclude these remarks, if that is acceptable.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I also want to recognize my friend and colleague, Senator McCain, who was there at the end to help us with this issue. The people of Alaska thank our colleagues, Senator Inouye, Senator McCain, and so many, for the consideration that was given these Alaska Territorial Guardsmen. Last Friday, we were disappointed to learn that some in the administration might not share our enthusiasm for putting this matter to bed and restoring the retirement benefits for the 26 elderly Alaska Native veterans. The statement of administration position on the Defense Appropriation Bill contains 2 sentences that read as follows. The administration objects to a new general provision that would count as active duty service the time Alaska Territorial Guards members served during World War II. This provision would establish a precedent of treating service performed by a state employee as active duty for purposes of the computation of retired pay. Now, Madam President, the notion that restoring these benefits establishes a precedent of treating service performed by a state employee as active duty service defies logic, it defies history. Not only is it inconsistent with the letter of Congress's finding in Section 8147 of the 2001 Defense Appropriations Act that the service was indeed federal service, it's inconsistent with the facts, and I believe it's inconsistent with the law. Our Lieutenant Governor, retired Lieutenant General Craig Campbell, when he heard this, he remarked, "The administration doesn't understand what the Territorial Guard is. This was an initiative of the federal government. They provided a federal service." General Campbell, recently retired as Adjutant General of the Alaska National Guard, he's absolutely correct on this. The Alaska Territorial Guard was created back in 1942 to protect Alaska from invasion by the Japanese. The notion that Japan had an interest in Alaska was not speculative, as we know. The Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor, landed in Attu and in Kiska on the Aleutian chain. Enemy submarines lurked there in the Bering Sea. The ATG was organized by U.S. Army Major Marvin Marston under the leadership of a territorial governor who reported to Washington. These were Uncle Sam's men. All who served were volunteers. They were not state employees. It was organized in the name of the President of the United States. It was armed by the United States Army. The operations of the units were inspected by the U.S. Army. The unit was disbanded in 1947 by order of the United States Army. The unit was well known for its skill in protecting Alaska, and these gentlemen were native hunters and fishermen, but they knew the land better than any soldier that the Army might have sent up from the lower 48, and they kept watch over 5,000 miles of coastline for enemy vessels and submarines. They shot down Japanese balloon bombs, protecting the Lend-Lease route between Alaska and Russia and recovering downed airmen. These were the core missions of the Territorial Guard. So it's very deeply disappointing that 62 years after the Alaska Territorial Guard was disbanded, that their value of service to our nation and to our success in World War II has been drawn into question. When I came to the floor on January 22nd of this year, I gave the Defense Department the benefit of the doubt. I believe, as did General Campbell and his staff judge advocate, that the 2000 legislation entitled members of the ATG to all the military benefits merited by their service. The military at one time held that position, but then on January 22nd they didn't. And I called upon the Department of Defense to work with me, work with Senator Begich to make things right. And the Alaska Congressional Delegation wrote to the President to enlist his personal support for this effort. 9 years now have passed since the Congress determined that service in the Alaska Territorial Guard during World War II was federal service. 9 years have passed since the Secretary of Defense ordered that these brave men of the Tundra Army who remain alive are entitled to discharge certificates from the U.S. Army. 9 years since they were granted full federal veterans benefits. And I would suggest that it's 9 years too late for the Defense Department to reopen the question of whether service in the ATG was federal service. The Congress has answered this question with finality. Now, I mentioned that many Americans have registered their opinions on the Internet over the administration's position on Territorial Guard benefits. Many think it's cruel to continue to deny these benefits, and many believe that the administration's position denigrates the service of the Alaska Territorial Guard. Some would suggest that the men who serve deserve an apology, but one perceptive individual suggested that I doubt that President Obama actually made this decision or even knows about it. So once again, Madam President, I would ask that President Obama personally support us in our quest to obtain justice for a few elderly Alaska Natives who once served our nation with patriotism, with pride, and with distinction. President Obama, show the heart, do the right thing, and support our efforts to restore military retirement benefits for these 26 individuals. With that, Madam President, I thank you and I yield the floor.
Senator from Hawaii.
Madam President, I have 6 unanimous consent.